Welcome back to Unhidden Curriculum, a podcast for the curious, where we unhide the tools, truths, and trials behind doing science. I'm Dr. Megan Puglia, and today we're going to unpack the scientific process, not as it's taught in textbooks, but as it's lived in labs. If you've ever wondered why science can feel like a mystery, it's partly because the process itself is often hidden. When you see the final product of a polished, peer-reviewed journal article, you're missing out on the messiness that went on behind the scenes. So let's change that. In this episode, we'll explore what the research cycle really looks like, why failure isn't normal but essential, and how messy, iterative science actually drives discovery. Whether you're just getting started in research or you've been around the bench a few times, I think you'll hear something that shifts your perspective. So first up, why the scientific process matters. Science is a method for discovering truth. It's not a set of facts handed down from on high. It's a process, a way of asking questions, collecting evidence, and refining our understanding of the world over time. It's humble by design. Every experiment, every analysis, every peer-reviewed paper is a small attempt to inch closer to what's true, while fully acknowledging we might be wrong or at least incomplete. Science doesn't promise certainty, it promises rigor. It doesn't give us perfect answers, but it does give us better questions. The scientific process is what separates evidence-based knowledge from opinions, assumptions, and vibes. When you understand how science is built, you're equipped to ask better questions, interpret findings through a more informed lens, and spot BS, which is an increasingly important skill in a world full of noise, opinions, and algorithms that are optimized for engagement over accuracy. In short, science gives us a disciplined way to cut through the noise and get closer to what's real. So how does the scientific process work? Let's start with what you were probably taught. A neat little diagram where you ask a question, make a hypothesis, test it, draw conclusions, share findings, and done. This notion of the scientific method as a clean, linear path is comforting. It makes sense. It suggests that if you follow the steps, ask, hypothesize, test, analyze, you'll get answers, results, truth. This version is taught for simplicity, and that's fine, but it sets up false expectations. It makes science feel like a one-shot game. One question, one experiment, one answer. In real research, it's more like ask a question, realize the question's too vague, so narrow it down to ask a better question. Review the literature and realize someone already did it. Ask a more novel question. Design an experiment. Realize the experiment is flawed, so redesign the experiment. Do that about 5 more times. Pilot the study. Find a bug in the script. Redesign 1 more time. Troubleshoot equipment. Collect data. Analyze the data and get nothing. Rethink everything. Try again with a better question. The actual scientific process is recursive, nonlinear, and often chaotic. That might sound exhausting, but here's the truth. The messiness isn't a detour. It's the engine of innovation. So in case you can't tell already, here's a quick pro tip. Things almost always take 3 to 5 times longer than you'd expect. So if you've got a deadline, build in plenty of extra time because science loves to surprise you. All right, let's dive a bit deeper into the research cycle that working scientists actually follow. Before we begin, I cannot emphasize enough how important organization is. Document everything. Spreadsheets are life. You'll want spreadsheets for the papers you've read, the methods you've used, the analyses you've run. Track everything. If your notes are a mess, your study will be too. So now that you've gotten yourself organized, let's start with asking better questions. How do you come up with a research question? Start by observing the world. Maybe something seems off or surprising or just incomplete. Ask a question. Not necessarily the right question yet, but a curious one. Then review what's known. Dive into the literature. Read what's been done and, just as important, what hasn't worked. Now this one can be a bit tricky due to a pesky little issue called publication bias. This refers to the fact that often only significant findings get published. Null results, those usually get tossed into a drawer. This is problematic because it wastes time, money, and resources. There is a push to change it, but we could still be doing much better as a field about publicizing our failures in general. Now that you've gotten a better grasp on what's been done before, you can generate a hypothesis. A good hypothesis will be specific and testable. You'll operationalize your variables. This is just a fancy way of saying define exactly what you're measuring and how. Next up, you'll get to designing and redesigning a study to test your hypothesis. This will go hand in hand with troubleshooting equipment, revising protocols, and navigating the laws of physics, and in my lab's case, the behavioral abilities and tolerance limits of tiny babies. It's important here to plan for what could go wrong. Participants will drop out, data will get corrupted, equipment will fail. Think in advance about how you'll handle it. And this is where pilot studies come in handy. These are small test runs to try things out and catch issues early. Pilots help you debug your methods, find bottlenecks, and clarify instructions, because you will find issues in pilot testing. Better now than 3 years in when you're halfway through your budget and timeline. Speaking of budgets, that brings us to another often unwritten step left out of the glossy brochure version of the research cycle. Get funding. Just like at dinner parties, it's often considered uncouth to talk about money in science. But unlike dinner parties, avoiding the topic puts science at risk. It's part of why we're facing a science funding crisis today. There's a widespread misunderstanding about what science actually costs and who pays for it. The truth is, you often can't test your question until someone else decides it's worth funding. Supplies, staff, software, even the electricity to run your equipment, it all costs money. How to get that money? That's a topic for a future episode or 10, but here's the gist. You have to convince funders that your project is both innovative and feasible. Too safe and it's boring, too ambitious and it's risky. The trick is to make it sound bold, doable, and worthwhile. Easy, right? Finally, you're ready to conduct the study. Data collection isn't glamorous. It's often tedious, but it matters. Whether you're working with human participants or cells in a dish, even tiny inconsistencies can ripple through your workflow and introduce major bias. I've seen everything from the phrasing used to explain a task to a participant to the temperature of the room during cell isolation impact results downstream. So here's the rule. Consistency is king. Yes, you can adjust for some confounds during analysis, but only if you know that they happened. That's why documentation is everything. Write it down, all of it, especially the unexpected stuff. You will not remember the details of what happened 2 years, 2 months, or maybe even 2 hours later, but those details matter. So do your future self a favor and keep a detailed, well-organized lab notebook. Next up, you'll analyze the data. Now, there are as many analytic techniques as there are studies to run, and we will be covering in-depth tutorials on many analytic techniques in future episodes. But for now, the goal is the same. Identify patterns, test your hypotheses, and make sense of the noise. Run your analysis, then double-check it, then recheck it. When you realize your R script had a typo and you've been averaging the wrong column the whole time, it happens. Now you'll interpret the results. This part is as much art as science. What do the results mean? Do they even answer the original question? Don't oversell, know the limits of your data, consider alternate explanations, and be honest about what you don't know and the limitations of your current design, because every study has them, even the biggest, most expensive ones. Next, you'll communicate your findings. Your work will only have an impact if it's out there in the world. So present your findings as a conference poster or a symposium talk or a journal article. This is where you will encounter the academic legend known as reviewer number 2, a mysterious figure who emerges from the shadows to demand impossible revisions, but you'll get through it. Finally, you've reached the end of the cycle, which is really just the beginning. Now you can ask the next question, because now you know more and you'll see how much you don't know. Every completed experiment, whether it confirmed your hypothesis or not, sparks 10 more questions. If you didn't get the result you expected, why not? If you did, what's the next layer? Can you break the findings? Are there specific conditions, populations, or contexts where it doesn't hold up? And that's how the cycle repeats. Not perfectly, but step by step, it moves us closer to refining how we understand the world. So this all sounds pretty straightforward, right? Except there's much more to the story. The official process is only half of it. The rest, that lives in the messy middle, the part shaped by mistakes, mentorship or the lack thereof it, and all the stuff no one puts on the syllabus. So let's dig into that hidden layer: failure, bias, and the invisible curriculum. One of the most unspoken truths of science is this: failure is not just common, it's essential. We rarely talk about the 8 failed pilot studies, the programming bugs, the gel that ran backwards, or the EEG cap that someone put on upside down. Go ahead, ask me how I know. But those failures are where real learning happens. They sharpen your question, they refine your methods, they teach you what doesn't work so you can get closer to what might. In academia, though, there is a lot of pressure to show only polished success. That's part of the hidden curriculum. The unspoken rules like you should already know how to analyze your data, or if you didn't get significant results, you failed, or asking for help means that you're not ready for research. None of that is true. But these ideas live in the margins, reinforced by how we mentor, publish, and reward scientists. Another hidden truth: bias creeps into every step, from the questions we choose to how we interpret ambiguous results to which findings get published. Science isn't immune to human messiness. Recognizing that makes you a better scientist, because only by recognizing and naming our biases can we start to address them. So part of your job as a developing researcher is to see the hidden processes, the way institutional incentives shape research questions, the way publication bias privileges flashy results, the way funding structures steer entire fields in certain directions. Learning to navigate this while staying curious, ethical, and grounded is the real skill. And if you're mentoring others, teach this explicitly. Normalize not knowing. Share your own messy drafts and failed attempts. That's how we break the illusion of perfect science. Creating that kind of openness doesn't just happen. It takes intention. It starts with lab culture: what's rewarded, what's allowed, and what's said out loud. And that's exactly what we'll unpack in the next episode. Understanding these hidden forces and embracing the messiness of science isn't just an intellectual exercise. It changes how you show up as a researcher. When you realize the research process is iterative, nonlinear, and full of uncertainty, you start showing up differently. You stop being afraid of wrong answers and start chasing better questions. You stop comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. You start embracing the process, not just the product. And honestly, that's when science starts to get fun. Because now you're not just following a script, you're contributing to a living, breathing body of knowledge. You're helping shape how we understand the world. You're becoming part of the process, not just a passive participant. Well, that's it for episode 2. Thanks for tuning in to Unhidden Curriculum. If this episode helped demystify the scientific process or gave you permission to be a little more open in your own research, consider sharing it with a lab mate or a student who needs to hear it. Got a story of your own failed study or unexpected result? I'd love to hear it. Leave a comment here or find me on your favorite social media platform. Let's make failure a little more public and a lot less shameful. And if you're enjoying the show, hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. We've got tutorials, interviews, and truth-telling coming your way every week. Until next time, keep chasing the questions that matter and stay curious.